There was a small boy named Nate. He had just moved to Deep Cove from Vancouver. He lived in a big brown house in Deep Cove. Deep Cove was a small town in British Columbia. Deep Cove was a very safe community, so he could walk to his neighbor's house without worrying about bad things happening to him. He was just starting kindergarten, and he didn't know anybody since he just moved there. So the biggest thing on his mind was to make friends and not to fall asleep in school. He had no sense of what his worldview was or what it would become. He walked to school every day with his mom. He played in his house without a care in the world. He went to hockey, had play dates, and everything was great. He didn't have to worry about anything because he was just a little boy who didn't know much about the world. He had little worldview, but in his worldview, the only thing he really knew about was Christianity and how lots of his friends were Christian. When he was a bit older, his parents couldn't afford to live in such a big house, so they started looking for a new house. They started putting our house up for sale and having open houses. When he had open houses, we had to be out of the house and do something elsewhere. This started expanding my worldview about money and how people value money. I learned this because my parents started explaining to me why we had to have open houses so that people could make offers on our house and we would take the highest offer. So my worldview started getting slowly bigger around the values of people. People valued their money, especially in Vancouver, where the housing prices kept going up and up. I learned that people valued housing and the cost of it was going up, so they valued their money as well. Eventually, we had a good offer on our house, and we accepted it and found a house for rent and moved there. When we moved to our new house, he couldn't walk to school with his sister and mom anymore. He had to drive to school because the house they were living in now was much farther away from his school. He couldn't play with his neighbors because they were all adults. He had to figure out how to play on his own or with his sister. He had to make an adjustment from having a big house with all the space he needed to having a much smaller space to play in. He also learned about the tenants that lived downstairs. His parents told him about how the tenants' kids didn't have an education. This expanded his worldview because he started gaining knowledge about how people value having a good education and having the knowledge to get a good job. As he spent more time living in this house, he kept expanding his worldview about money and how rent works. His parents taught him about rent and how it works, that every month you pay a certain amount of money to keep living in the house that you're renting. In this house, it also had a wood-burning fireplace, so that we had to buy wood if we wanted to have a fire and keep our house warm without the heaters. I started expanding my worldview about BC's economy because I learned that BC has an abundant amount of trees, so wood wasn't hard to get, and that BC has massive forests and natural beauty that make it great for outdoor activities. When he got older, we were close to moving out of the house we were renting. He started getting curious about what his parents were always talking about, so he asked them to tell him, and they taught him about government and how it works. Learning about government really expanded his worldview because he noticed it was pervasive in society. It was where individuals could become leaders in our society. All the streets were made by government and how government made major decisions that affected all of Canada or just BC. Government shaped society. Then my parents said they were going to start looking for a new house so we could move out of the one that we were renting. When we finally moved out of the house we were renting and we moved into a one that he's living in now, he also started hanging out with the older kids that lived on the street. They taught him many valuable lessons and some not so valuable ones. They also taught him about road hockey and made him into a pretty good road hockey player. He snapped many sticks. He eventually got to the point where he was competitive with the kids that he was playing with. They also taught him about some beliefs of people. This expanded his worldview because they told him about Christianity and how there are a lot of people in BC that are Christian, and about church and how it's very boring. They also told him about skiing, so he asked his parents if he could ski, and they put him in skiing for the first time. This expanded his worldview because he learned about how BC's geography is very mountainous. When his family moved, he also started playing competitive hockey. With all the activities he was doing, it expanded his worldview about time and how people value their time. So he had to manage it because he needed to value his time. 2 years later, he is still having fun and expanding his worldview. In grade 6, he didn't like school. Then in grade 7, he liked it a bit more, although he still hated having homework, so he did almost all of it at school. Then he went into grade 8 and he had to accept that he was going to get homework and do it well at home.